The delivery girl heard a child shrieking, and she couldn't bring herself to walk away. She strode past the chaos of failing doctors and brought a dying boy back from the edge using a remedy passed down from her grandmother. What she didn't realize was that the child she saved was the sole heir of a powerful crime boss. And now she wasn't allowed to leave until the person trying to kill him was found. The chandelier hanging above the master bedroom trembled softly, disturbed by the frantic movement of a dozen people pressed around a single bed. But this wasn't a medical ward. This was the Dixon estate, 20,000 square feet of marble, rare artwork, and secrets designed to stay buried. None of that mattered. 8-year-old Raleigh Dixon was slipping away. His small frame jerked violently against the smooth sheets, back bending unnaturally as foam gathered at his lips. Machines beeped in panicked rhythms, blending with the desperate commands of specialists flown in from Switzerland, Japan, and the East Coast. Epinephrine, now, the lead doctor called out, hands trembling around the syringe. He'd operated on presidents and senators. But this child, this fragile boy, was fading no matter what he tried. Roy Dixon stood at the end of the bed, a towering man in a custom suit worth more than most people's yearly paycheck. His knuckles whitened around the wooden frame until it creaked. He controlled ports, owned judges, pulled political strings with a whisper. Men feared him. Entire neighborhoods obeyed him. But watching his only son suffer, Roy was no crime boss. He was a terrified father with no power left. "What's happening?" His voice was dangerously calm, the kind of quiet that warns of coming storms. "You promised the treatment would work." The doctor didn't answer at first. His eyes stayed glued to Rowley's fading vitals. "The seizures, they're not responding. His body is rejecting every method we've tried." "Then try something else." Roy's roar shook the room, but they had already exhausted every option. The doctor finally met Roy's gaze, and the resignation in his eyes froze Roy's blood. "We've reached the end. His organs are shutting down. I don't think he'll survive the night." The words hung like a death sentence. Before Roy could react, Rowley's monitor screamed. The boy's eyes rolled back. His body went rigid. "He's crashing. Get the defibrillator." The room exploded into chaos. And downstairs, someone knocked at the door. "Before we continue, welcome back to Heartfelt Stories. If you are hooked in and ready to enjoy this thrilling story, make sure to subscribe so you never miss our daily real-life inspired stories. And don't forget to drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. A knock echoed again, louder this time. No one in the bedroom paid attention. They were too busy fighting for Rowley's final breaths. A third knock, then a hesitant voice from the hallway. "Mr. Dixon, I'm sorry to interrupt, but—" "Get out." Roy's voice cracked like lightning, but the staff woman didn't move. She clutched the doorframe, shaking. "Sir, the ingredient delivery is here. She says someone needs to sign or she can't leave." Roy spun toward her, fury blazing across his face. "I don't care about ingredients, or dinner, or anything else." The woman flinched but didn't back away. She'd worked for Roy for decades, long enough to know when pushing was dangerous and when it was necessary. "I only thought," she stammered. "The chef mentioned they were special herbs. Medicinal ones. For Rowley's meals." That one word, medicinal, sliced through Roy's rage. Before he could respond, a voice drifted up the hallway. "Is everything okay?" I heard shouting. And then it happened. Rowley let out a sound no child should ever make. A scream scraped raw by agony. It pierced the air, hit the walls, climbed down the staircase, and slammed straight into Michelle Cobb's chest like a physical blow. She didn't think. She didn't debate. She didn't ask permission. She dropped the crate of herbs, shoved past the stunned housekeeper, and sprinted toward the source of that scream. Her sneakers skidded on marble as she burst through the master bedroom door and froze. The scene before her was chaos. Doctors crowding a collapsing child. Monitors shrieking. A father looking at his dying son like the world was ending. And an 8-year-old boy convulsing hard enough to break himself. Before anyone could stop her, Michelle crossed the room. "Who are you?" one doctor shouted. She ducked his arm, slid past another, and reached Rowley's bedside. The heat rolling off his skin was alarming. His lips were blue, his eyes unfocused. Michelle had seen this before. Not here, not like this, but But years ago in her grandmother's tiny kitchen, when a younger cousin had collapsed from something no hospital could explain, a guard grabbed her shoulder. "You need to leave." Michelle spun, meeting Roy Dixon's eyes for the first time. He was a man people feared, a man who breathed power, a man who looked ready to kill anything that got in his way. But Michelle's voice didn't shake. "Touch me again," she said quietly, "and you'll regret it. That boy doesn't have time for your rules." Roy lifted a hand, stopping the guard. Something in Michelle's expression, a fierce certainty, made him hesitate. "You have 30 seconds, Roy said, voice edged with steel. "Save my son, or I shoot you myself." Michelle turned back to Rowley without blinking. 30 seconds to save a child. 30 seconds to rewrite her entire life. Michelle steadied her breathing as she pressed her fingertips to Rowley's neck, searching for the rhythm beneath the chaos. His pulse thrashed wildly, too fast, too irregular. His entire nervous system was in full collapse. "I need boiling water," Michelle said sharply. "And towels. And the herbs I brought. Rosemary, thyme, lavender." Now, no one moved. The doctors stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "Someone get her out of this room," the lead specialist barked. "She has no medical clearance. She'll kill that boy." Roy Dixon didn't hesitate. His gun was out before the last word left the doctor's mouth, the barrel pressed against the man's forehead. "My son is already dying," Roy growled. "You had 3 weeks, and you failed. She gets her chance. Do what she says." The color drained from the doctor's face. A single nod sent staff scrambling. Maria, the housekeeper, practically sprinted from the room to grab the items Michelle requested. Michelle's fingers traveled along Rowley's collarbone, then his arms, pressing precise points her grandmother had taught her years ago. "His system is firing in every direction," she murmured. "I'm trying to reset it." "A complete neurological crash?" one nurse whispered. "How can she?" "She said do it," Roy snapped. "Shut up and watch." Maria rushed back in, arms full of the supplies. "Here, everything you asked for." Michelle grabbed a towel, dunked it into the steaming water, wrung it out fast, then scattered the herbs across it. The scent filled the air instantly, sharp, medicinal, earthy. "This is archaic nonsense," the doctor spat, though much softer now. Michelle ignored him completely. She folded the warm herbal cloth and pressed it firmly against Rowley's chest, right above his heart. With her other hand, she continued working the pressure points up his neck and down his arms. "Breathe, baby," she whispered, mostly to him, partly to herself. 1, 2, 3, reset. Rowley's body jerked so violently that one nurse gasped and another backed away. "Stop," the specialist yelled. "You're making it worse." Michelle didn't flinch. She'd seen this exact reaction before, the body fighting before it dropped into healing. 4, 5, 6, reset, she repeated, tightening her circles, pressing harder on each point. The machines shrieked louder. The seizure peaked. Roy's finger tightened on the trigger. "You're out of time," he said, voice ice cold. "That's 30 seconds. 7, 8, 9, reset." And then, everything stopped. Rowley's body went completely limp. For a terrifying moment, the room fell into absolute silence. No movement, no breath. Even the machines flattened into one long, endless note. "He's gone," a doctor whispered. Michelle didn't stop. She kept rubbing, kept pressing, kept believing. And then, Rowley gasped. Not the choking breath of someone dying, but a deep, desperate inhale like he'd surfaced from underwater after minutes without air. His small fingers twitched. His chest rose steadily. The blue faded from his lips. The monitor beeped, then stabilized, then held a strong, certain rhythm. "He's breathing," a nurse whispered, stunned. "He's actually breathing." Michelle sagged forward, her hand still on his chest, feeling the heartbeat grow stronger beneath her palm. Rowley blinked, dazed but alive. "It's okay," Michelle whispered to him, her voice softening. "You're safe now. Just breathe for me." Roy Dixon lowered his gun slowly, staring at the impossible unfolding in front of him. His son, the child everyone said wouldn't last the night, was staring up at the stranger who had just saved him. A stranger Roy now realized he couldn't afford to let walk away. The room was hollow with quiet after Rowley's breath evened out. The kind of silence that happens when people realize they just witnessed something impossible. Nurses wiped tears. The lead physician stared at his instruments as if they'd betrayed him. Roy Dixon stood motionless, the hard line of his jaw softening only when he looked at his son. Michelle's hands trembled as she slid off the bed. Adrenaline was spilling out of her in shaky heat. She wanted nothing more than to collect her crate, get out of this gilded prison, and go back to the small life waiting for her. But when she bent down to check Rowley one last time, her eyes caught something small and telling. "Lift his tongue," she whispered, almost to herself. Roy and the doctor both looked up, puzzled. Michelle carefully eased Rowley's mouth open and glanced at the surface. The edges were tinged with an odd greenish film. Faint, but unmistakable to someone who had seen that sign before. "Look at his tongue," Michelle said quietly. "Do you see that slight discoloration?" The doctor leaned in, frowning. "That's unusual." He turned to Roy. "We didn't note that. It's not a common symptom in the conditions we've been treating." Michelle swallowed hard, the memory snapping into place like the final piece of a puzzle. She thought of the first time she'd seen those signs in her grandmother's kitchen. The cousin who'd eaten treats and fallen sick days later. She thought of the way the seizures had always come after meals. Her stomach clenched. "When do the episodes happen?" she asked. Roy's expression hardened. "They're random. Morning, afternoon, night." "No," Michelle said, voice low now with the sudden edge of certainty. "Not random. They always come after he eats." Roy's eyes narrowed until they were slits. The room shifted around him. A man used to control realized his child's suffering might not be a fluke of fate, but a deliberate act. He barked for the household manager, the man who ran everything below stairs, and the staff assembled, faces pale. "Who prepares Rowley's special meals?" Roy demanded. "The head chef oversees it," one of the nurses answered. "But it's always inspected. Routines are strict." "And who has access to those inspected items?" Michelle pressed. "Who delivers special treats directly to Rowley?" A hush. I slid to the man who coordinated the service rotations, the right hand who'd been with Roy for years. He was always near, always watchful, trusted more than the rest. He had access. He had opportunity. Roy's hand tightened into a fist. Betrayal was a cold thing in his world, worse than any rival's attack. Michelle felt the weight of that moment pressed down on her. She hadn't come here for any of this. She had dropped a crate. She had followed a scream. But now she held the word poison between her lips, and it tasted like an accusation that could shatter everything. Roy turned slowly, his voice measured but loaded with threat. "If someone inside my house is making my son sick, they die? If you're right, I want proof. I want him caught. I want the name." Michelle glanced at Rowley, who slept fitfully. She thought of the cracked apartment, the small hands of a daughter waiting at aftercare, the grave risk in confronting men like Roy Dixon. Yet this child's face had been pressed into her memory when he had clutched her wrist hours ago. She met Roy's stare. "I'm sure enough to act," she said. "But you won't believe my word alone. I need to gather evidence. I need access to his food, to the supplies, to—" "You'll have it," Roy interrupted. His voice was brittle with a promise and a threat wrapped together. "You stay? You observe. You help me find who poisoned my son. Do that, and you, and your child, will have protection. Refuse and you walk out that door at your own risk." Michelle felt the world narrow to a single spine-tingling point. Stay and hunt a killer inside a house of secrets, or flee and leave an 8-year-old to the same slow death. She thought of the life she'd left outside, the muffled laughter at Emily's aftercare, the small routines that kept a family afloat. But she also thought of Rowley's small hand clinging to hers. Before she answered, this message cuts in for a second. "If you were Michelle, would you accept Roy's deal to stay and expose the traitor, risking everything to protect a child you barely know? Or would you refuse and save yourself, hoping someone else could stop it? Tell us in the comments." Roy watched her, waiting. Michelle straightened, the decision settling in her bones like a cold promise. "I'll help," she said. "I'll find proof." The room exhaled as if a pressure had been released. Outside, the estate's long corridors seemed suddenly narrower, every servant's glance a potential hazard. Michelle had agreed to stay. She had stepped into a game that had rules she didn't know, and she had no guarantee she'd ever be allowed to leave. The Dixon Estates kitchen at 5 in the morning was another universe entirely. Steel counters gleamed. Timers beeped in perfect rhythm. Staff moved with military precision, each following steps drilled into them for years. Every ingredient was labeled, cataloged, and logged. Every dish meant for Rowley passed through multiple checks like sacred ritual. Miracle worker, huh? The head chef glanced at Michelle while slicing vegetables with lightning-fast strokes. You're the one who saved the boy. I got lucky, Michelle replied, keeping her voice low. Luck? He snorted under his breath. There's no such thing in this house. For the next 3 days, Michelle watched everything. She watched the shipments arrive each morning at 6. Same 2 delivery men. Same sealed crates. Gloves, masks, careful notes. She watched the kitchen staff rotate, each assigned duties with strict boundaries. She watched the household coordinator oversee every step, clipboard tucked under his arm, eyes constantly scanning. And yet, Rowley had been poisoned, which meant these perfect routines weren't perfect at all. Meanwhile, Rowley grew attached to Michelle like a magnet. Whenever Roy brought the boy downstairs, he would search for her instantly, small steps quickening when he saw her. One afternoon, while she helped prepare his meal, Rowley tugged on her sleeve. Sometimes my snacks smell weird, he whispered. Michelle crouched so she met his eyes. What kind of snacks? The special ones, Rowley said. Uncle gives them to me after dinner. He says they help me grow strong, but they make my stomach feel bad. Michelle's pulse kicked. Can you tell me what they look like? Little brown squares, he said, wrinkling his nose. They taste bitter. Her mind flashed back to the boy's symptoms. The timing, the discoloration, the seizures starting after meals. Rowley, Michelle whispered, don't eat anything you're given privately anymore. Not until I say it's okay. He nodded solemnly, trusting her more than anyone else in the house. That night, Michelle returned to the kitchen long after everyone had gone to bed. The vast room felt completely different in the dark, colder, hollow, echoing with distant hums of refrigeration units. She used the keycard Roy had given her, heart racing as she moved toward the locked cabinet she'd watched the coordinator protect like treasure. She'd timed his routine. She knew when he would be on the other side of the estate. She slid the stolen key into the lock. Click. Inside were supplements, powders, and ingredients specific to Rowley's diet. She scanned each one carefully, lifting lids, sniffing contents, holding jars under the flashlight on her phone. And then she found it. A container labeled organic cocoa powder for Rowley smoothies. Michelle opened it and froze. It didn't smell like chocolate. It smelled chemical, medicinal. Wrong. She used a small spoon to lift some powder into the light. Mixed within the brown powder were faint green flecks, the same green tint she'd seen on Rowley's tongue. Her stomach dropped. She snapped photos quickly. Close-ups of the jar, the label, the texture, the foreign substance inside. She sealed the jar again and placed it exactly where she'd found it. But as she shut the cabinet door, footsteps echoed down the hall. Heavy, slow, getting closer. Michelle killed the flashlight instantly, heart slamming against her ribs. She pressed herself flat against the wall, barely breathing. A shadow stretched across the threshold of the kitchen. Someone paused, listening, waiting. Her fingers brushed the handle of a knife on the counter. She didn't want to touch it, but she also didn't want to die unarmed. Boss wants you upstairs, a voice called from farther down the hall. The footsteps turned, moved away, faded. Michelle waited a full 10 minutes before she dared move. When she slipped back to her room, her hands were still shaking so hard she could barely lock the door. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the photos glowing on her phone screen. There was no doubt now. Someone close to Roy was poisoning his son, and if she didn't find a way to prove it safely, she might disappear before morning light. She glanced out the window, and her blood ran cold. The man who oversaw the household stood in the courtyard, speaking quietly on his phone, his expression sharp and calculating. Michelle suddenly knew, with terrifying clarity, that someone inside the mansion had grown suspicious of her, and that she was running out of time. 3 days passed, each one tightening the air inside the Dixon estate until the halls felt too narrow to breathe in. Rowley's strength grew slowly but steadily. He walked more. He smiled sometimes. And no matter where he went, His eyes searched first for Michelle. One morning, Roy came downstairs with Rowley at his side. The boy was pale but alert, and he clutched a drawing in his small hands. "For you," Rowley whispered, holding it out shyly. Michelle crouched down. The picture showed two stick figures, a small one beside a taller one with curly hair that looked vaguely like her own. "That's me," Rowley said softly. "And you. You made me better." Michelle's chest tightened. "This is the most beautiful thing I've ever been given." Roy watched the exchange from a distance, his expression unreadable. There was something in his eyes Michelle hadn't seen before, gratitude mixed with something heavier, something old and wounded. Later that morning, Roy delivered the news. "We're having a gathering tonight," he said. "Family, my inner circle. They'll want to see Rowley standing again. It sends a message." "A message?" Michelle repeated. Roy nodded. "That Dixon blood doesn't break." The announcement rippled through the household. Staff polished every surface twice over. The kitchen prepared dishes reserved only for the most important nights. Men in tailored suits arrived in sleek black cars, each one greeted with firm handshakes and watchful eyes. Michelle stayed in the kitchen, watching the preparations with a sharpened sense of purpose. The contaminated cocoa jar weighed heavy in her thoughts. She kept her phone close, the photos ready. Roy walked in, his gaze sweeping the room. "You'll join us tonight." Michelle hesitated. "Why me?" "You saved my son, and you're the only one I trust to keep him calm," Roy said. Then his tone darkened. "And you're the only one with the courage to confront what you've found." He didn't have to explain further. This night was no celebration. It was a battlefield disguised with fine china. Michelle took a slow breath. "If I'm going to expose someone, I need to choose the moment." Roy nodded once. "Choose well." For hours, Michelle stayed close to the kitchen, working on a drink the way her grandmother used to, a warm herbal mixture meant for gatherings, light and fragrant. She prepared one small glass for each guest. But one glass, was different. She added nothing that would cause harm, nothing that would truly poison. But she crushed a few harmless supplements that would mimic the early physical symptoms: sweating, tremors, rapid pulse. Then she added a pinch of the tainted cocoa powder she had sampled in secret. Not enough to injure, just enough to reveal the truth. By evening, the dining room shimmered beneath a chandelier that cast warm, deceptive light over the long table. Expensive suits filled the chairs. Laughter rang hollow. Clinks of silverware mingled with murmured conversations about business and alliances. Roy sat at the head, Rowley beside him in a booster seat. The household coordinator, the man Michelle had grown to fear, sat directly across from Roy, the place of honor. Michelle took her seat further down the table. Conversations dipped as curious eyes slid her way. A civilian among lions. Roy stood and raised his glass. 3 weeks ago, I thought I was going to bury my son. Silence fell instantly. But a stranger walked into this home and did what the world's finest couldn't. He gestured toward Michelle. Tonight, we honor Rowley's recovery. Polite applause followed, though some faces remained tight, suspicious. Chef delivered Michelle's herbal drinks, placing a glass before each guest. The coordinator received his last, his glass darker than the rest, though only slightly noticeably so. Michelle's heart hammered. She lifted her own drink to her lips, eyes never leaving the man directly across from Roy. Roy raised his. "To Rowley," he said. "To Rowley." The table echoed. Everyone drank. Michelle counted seconds in her head. Rowley giggled softly beside her. Roy rested one hand on the boy's back. The room hummed with tension beneath the polite conversation. And then, across the table, the coordinator's hand twitched. He blinked rapidly. Sweat broke across his brow. He reached for his water glass and knocked it over. "Are you all right?" one of the capos asked, confusion creasing his brow. The man tried to speak, but his jaw clenched instead. His breath caught. His fingers curled like claws. 30 seconds passed. Then 1 full minute. Michelle stood slowly, her heart steady now. "He's showing the same early symptoms Rowley did." The room fell silent. Michelle stepped beside the man who had controlled every detail of the house, who had overseen every meal her little patient had eaten. She lifted his lip gently. "Look at his tongue," she said. The edges were tinted faintly green, just like Rowley's. Roy Dixon rose from his chair, every muscle coiled. and the table understood in an instant. The traitor had just revealed himself. For a heartbeat, the dining room was a picture of order, crystal catching light, men in dark suits, little Rowley laughing nervously at something a capo had said. Then the air snapped. The coordinator, the man who had stood invisible in the background for years, the one who'd touched every tray and signed every receipt, went white. His hand shook so badly the glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. He had the same twitch in his face that Rowley had shown the worst nights. "You all right?" someone asked, the question absurdly small in that moment. The coordinator made a sound that wasn't a word. He lurched, convulsed, then collapsed sideways as if invisible strings pulled him down. Plates flew. Men scrambled. The orchestra of polite conversation died in a single, horrible note. Michelle moved before she could think. She dove toward Rowley and shoved him beneath the table, dragging him down into the shadowed space where porcelain scattered and forks clinked. "Close your eyes," she told him, voice fierce and urgent. "Don't look. Stay with me. Breathe." Above them, chaos burned hot. Roy crossed the distance to his fallen friend in 3 long strides, hands already groping for the man's throat, then stopping because the thing people wore in suits was not clothing here, but a code. He knelt and lifted the man's head, then froze when he saw the same faint green at the lip. "You poisoned him," Roy said, and the sentence landed like a verdict. A dozen men pivoted toward the coordinator like it was the only orbit left to fall into. He wasn't coherent. He spasmed, and in a moment of lucidity bared teeth and spat a nameless hatred at the room. "You were soft. You let the family rot. I fixed it." The gloves came off. The coordinator's hand scraped for a weapon. It was a small, predictable move. One handed him a pistol in the muck of his mind. He aimed for the head of the table, for the man who had made him, who had raised and rewarded him. He fired. Time bent. The shot cracked the air, and a chandelier's light went out as glass fractured behind Michelle's head. She felt the concussion like a slap, but there was no time to register pain. Roy was across the table in an instant, tackling the coordinator with a brutal strength that had nothing to do with suits or status. Plates and chairs became silent witnesses as the 2 men rolled, throwing each other into a riot of splintered porcelain. The room split into 2 instincts: draw and obey, or not interfere. Most pulled back, hands hovering over holsters. The capo nearest the door barked orders to the guards, but Roy's voice cut through: "Stay down." His shoulder bled from where a blade or a punch had nicked him. He didn't care. Under the table, Michelle kept Rowley pressed against her shoulder. The boy's small body trembled with every explosion of noise above them. She sang soft nonsense syllables she'd learned from her mother, something to drown out the violence and be a lullaby all at once. Roy had the advantage of righteous fury. He pinned the coordinator, wrenching the weapon from his grasp. The man scrambled, clawed, tried to bite, to do anything to survive the moment he had created. But when a life built on quiet betrayals meets someone it has wronged, the balance is simple and unforgiving. "You poisoned my son," Roy said, each word like a drop of ice. The coordinator's eyes brimmed with fear and something like defiance. "You thought killing the boy would make me harder. You were wrong." The coordinator made one last desperate move for a second gun. Roy reacted like a man who'd foreseen every betrayal and prepared for this one. He grabbed the barrel, wrestled it until it slipped free and fired. The sound was final. The coordinator went limp. Silence slammed down after the shot. Not the quiet of peace, but the heavy, stunned hush that follows a door closing on a life. Men stared at the body, at the pool of blood, then at Roy, who stood breathing hard and stained by the cost. Some caps bowed their heads like sheep. Others only watched, calculating, noting that the edict had been delivered. Betray Dixon blood and you die. That code would travel through the underworld as quickly as any contract. Rowley whimpered and clung to Michelle, and Roy, still shaking, climbed out from the wreckage and moved to the table's edge. He looked at the child, at Michelle, then at the mess that used to be a family's inner circle. For a moment the menace in his face softened in a way only fathers understand. "Get the doctor," Roy said, voice raw. "Now." Hands were at work. Guards pulled together a stretcher. Someone called a surgeon, Another barked for anyone who could stitch a wound. The room that had minutes before celebrated recovery now cataloged its own ruin. Michelle felt hollow and nauseous. The sight of the coordinator's body did not bring triumph. It brought a new kind of fear. The man on the floor had been trusted for years. His corpse meant the house had swallowed one of its own, and everyone knew that the fallout would be dangerous and far-reaching. Roy approached Michelle slowly, his jaw set. The cut on his shoulder wept. His hand trembled when he reached for hers. "You saved him," he said simply. It was not gratitude like a check. It was the sober acknowledgement of what had been traded. Michelle looked at Rowley, then at Roy. The mansion would never be the same. The balance of power had been reset with a bullet and a broken chair. Outside, sirens in the distance, summoned by panic or by orders, began to wail. Inside, the Dixon household moved into a new, colder equilibrium. Michelle wrapped Rowley tighter and whispered, "You're safe now." She didn't know if she had the right to promise it, but she meant it in the only way she could, with the force of a vow. Roy, blood on his shirt, watched the house that made him and broke him. He breathed in, then out, and with the tiredness of a man who'd been betrayed, he gave the only order that finally felt honest: "Clean this up, and make sure he's buried with no honors." They obeyed. The long night closed around the Dixon estate like a heavy curtain. Outside, dawn would come as it always did, indifferent, perfunctory. Inside, lives had been rearranged by a single act of courage and a single act of cold retribution. The cost of saving one small life had been more than Michelle had imagined. A death at close hand, a family cleft open, and the knowledge that she now belonged, inextricably, to the world she had only meant to pass through. The sun rose over the Dixon estate 3 days later, turning the sky into a soft wash of gold and rose. It slipped through the tall windows of Rowley's bedroom, warming the room that had once been filled with machines, alarms, and anguish. Now it was quiet. Peaceful in a way Michelle had never seen since stepping into this world. Rowley slept deeply, one arm thrown over his pillow, curls resting against his forehead. No tremors, no fevers, no choking gasps in the night. Just the steady rise and fall of a chest finally free from danger. Michelle stood in the doorway, watching the small boy breathe like a normal 8-year-old for the first time in weeks. She'd barely slept herself. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the fight, the gun, the broken table, the look in the coordinator's eyes before everything went still. Violence she never chose had wrapped itself around her, and some part of her knew it would stay in her memory forever. "You're awake." Michelle turned. Roy stood behind her, arm in a sling, looking exhausted but strangely lighter. There were lines carved into his face now, lines carved by grief, betrayal, and survival. "Couldn't sleep," Michelle said. "Not after everything." Roy stepped beside her, both of them watching Rowley in silence. "You saved him twice," Roy said finally. "Once from the poison, and once from the man who fed it to him." He exhaled slowly. "I don't know how to repay that." Michelle swallowed. "Don't repay anything. Just take care of him. He deserves peace." "He will have it," Roy said. "My house is sealed. My circle is tighter than it's ever been. No one touches my son again." Rowley stirred then, his eyes fluttering open. When he saw Michelle, he sat up quickly and reached out with small, hopeful hands. "Michelle," he said, voice still rough with sleep. "Are you staying?" She crossed to the bed and brushed a gentle hand across his forehead. "I'm here," she said, "and I'm not going anywhere." Rowley smiled, truly smiled, and wrapped his arms around her. From the doorway, Roy watched them, something softening in his expression. Not the softness of weakness, but the softness of a man seeing a future he almost lost. Later that morning, Roy called Michelle into his office. A cavernous room lined with dark wood and books that probably hadn't been touched in years. On the desk sat a stack of papers, keys, envelopes. Wealth enough to change any life. "This is for you," Roy said. "A house, a bank account, new security for you and your daughter. You'll never have to struggle again." Michelle stared at the papers, then slowly pushed them back. "I don't want money," she said. "I want to keep him safe. That's all." Roy blinked. "You'd choose kitchen duty over a mansion?" Michelle nodded. "I want to stay here." I want to oversee his meals myself. I want to make sure nothing like this ever happens again. A slow smile, the first genuine one she'd seen, crossed Roy's face. You're unlike anyone I've ever met, Michelle Cobb. I'll take that as a compliment. It is, Roy said. And you'll stay? The house is still yours. The security is still yours. But Rowley, he'll have you too. Outside, Rowley called for her, his small voice echoing down the hall. Michelle stepped to the balcony a few minutes later with Rowley's hand in hers. Together, they watched the sun climb higher, painting the estate in warm light. It's pretty, Rowley whispered. It is, Michelle said. Every sunrise means a new start. Will you stay forever? Rowley asked. Michelle squeezed his hand, a promise settling into place. As long as I breathe, she said softly, nothing will ever hurt you again. Behind them, Roy stepped onto the balcony with a cup of coffee, watching the two figures silhouetted by morning light, a child reborn and the woman who had saved him in every way that counted. Sometimes the people who change your life forever are the ones you never saw coming. Thank you for watching this story to the very end. If you're already part of our community, we appreciate you more than you know. If you're new here, welcome. We share real life, inspired stories every day, and we'd love to have you with us. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a story that touches the heart. And before you go, tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Michelle's shoes? And where are you watching from today?